Pick almost any two vertebrates that are roughly the same body size, a chicken and a large lizard, say, and weigh their brains side by side. The bird's brain can easily outweigh the reptile's by a factor of 10. That gap is not a fluke of one odd pairing. Across the entire vertebrate family tree, from fish to birds to elephants, relative brain size varies roughly tenfold between the biggest brain groups and the smallest. So here is a question worth sitting with. Why would evolution let brains balloon in some lineages and stay tiny in others, when a bigger brain sounds like it should be useful for pretty much everyone? Brains are not free. They are among the most metabolically expensive tissue an animal can own, burning through energy at a rate wildly out of proportion to their size, and they keep doing it around the clock, including while the animal sleeps. Muscle and fat can coast through a lean week without much trouble. A brain cannot. Cut its energy supply for too long, and the damage to development and performance can be permanent, something researchers call brain sparing, because the body will starve almost everything else before it starves the brain. A finished brain is worth all of that expense. A brain that is still under construction is not. Sensing danger, remembering where food is, outsmarting a rival, all of it depends on wiring that takes real time to mature, which means a growing brain racks up costs long before it delivers any of the benefits it was built for. When a brain does finish developing, the payoff can be enormous, and species cash it indifferently depending on what they need. Electric fish called mormyrids devote unusually large brains just to sense murky water through electrical fields. Primates lean on sharp binocular vision and precise hand control, and lizards that evolved extra legs needed extra neural real estate to keep them all coordinated. In humans, brain size explains a modest but real slice of the variation in intelligence between individuals, and that is not just a human quirk. The same pattern has now turned up in chimpanzees, and even in a small, unassuming songbird called the chestnut-headed thrush. Bigger brain species also tend to be more adaptable in ways that matter for survival. They are more likely to invent new ways of finding food, dodge predators successfully, and survive when humans drop them into a brand new habitat. Their populations tend to stay more stable over time too, lowering the odds of a local extinction. Add it up, and a bigger brain looks like one of the best investments evolution could make, which makes that tenfold gap even stranger. If bigger brains pay off this reliably, evolution should be nudging every lineage toward one. Instead, most species stay locked at a fraction of the relative brain size their closest big-brained relatives eventually reach. One of the first scientists to take that puzzle seriously was primatologist Robert Martin, back in the 1980s. Comparing mammal species, Martin noticed that the ones with the biggest brains also tended to have the longest pregnancies, almost as if a mother's own metabolism was rationing how large her offspring's brain was allowed to grow. Martin called it the maternal energy hypothesis, and for years it struggled to hold up under testing. Some of the clearest predictions came back unfavorable, and one comparison in particular, between bird species that hatch ready to run around and ones that hatch blind and helpless, flatly contradicted it. The core idea never fully disappeared though. It kept getting revised and expanded, and it has now been folded into something broader that researchers call the parental provisioning hypothesis, laid out in a new synthesis just published in the journal PLOS Biology. The problem it is trying to solve is what biologists call the bootstrapping problem. Before a brain finishes developing, it cannot really pay its own way. It cannot help an animal find enough food, dodge enough danger, or do much of anything a fully grown brain can do. So somebody else has to cover the bill while construction is underway. That somebody is a parent, and the total energy a parent hands over through pregnancy, milk, regurgitated food, or simply body heat while huddling over a helpless newborn is what researchers call parental provisioning. Being young and big-brained is also just dangerous. Juveniles are smaller, clumsier, and less experienced than adults, which makes them easy targets for predators. And in many species, they get pushed to the bottom of the social ladder, shoved toward worse food and worse shelter. Their brains are more expensive to run to, not less. Juvenile mammals are often more encephalized than the adults they will grow into, and wiring fresh connections, then pruning the ones that never get used, costs more energy per gram than maintaining a brain that is already finished. Even play, which looks like idle fun, turns out to be part of the bill. Primate species that pack on the most brain tissue after birth also tend to play the most vigorously, and vigorous play itself burns real, measurable energy. Ever wonder why some birds take years to even attempt their first mating season, long after their bodies already look fully grown? It is because their brain and body actually finished developing that long ago. In birds, growth is often complete years before the animal ever attempts to breed, which is very different from most mammals, where physical adulthood and reproduction tend to arrive close together. That extended gap between looking fully grown and being ready to reproduce would be an enormous waste of time in the wild if a fledgling had to fend for itself the whole while. It only makes sense because, in the meantime, a parent kept flying food back to the nest. Some seabird chicks stay dependent on their parents for well over a year after hatching, long after they already look like miniature adults, precisely because their brains and bodies raced ahead to finish growing, while somebody else was covering the grocery bill. Most cold-blooded animals skip this stage entirely. Once a fish, a frog, or most reptiles lay their eggs, parental investment is essentially finished. The hatchling is on its own from day one, which caps how large and complex its brain can practically become. Birds and mammals took the opposite evolutionary bet. They kept investing well beyond the egg, through gestation, nursing, and repeated feeding trips back to the nest. And that extended investment is exactly what the parental provisioning hypothesis says opened the door to bigger brains in the first place. It is a tidy story. A tidy story is not automatically a proven one, though. So what does the actual evidence look like once researchers go out and test it across hundreds of real species? Track how fast an animal's brain grows through its early life, and you notice something strange. Growth rockets along at a steep, steady pace, and then, right around the moment a young animal stops being fed and starts fending for itself, that growth abruptly slams on the brakes. That timing is not a coincidence if the parental provisioning idea holds up. It would mean the brain grows fast for exactly as long as somebody else is footing the energy bill, then slows down the instant the free ride ends. There's a flip side worth asking about too. What happens in species where nobody ever picks up that bill in the first place? Most fish are a good example. Provisioning happens entirely inside the egg, so brain growth only stays fast for the brief window before the egg's own reserves run out, and then it has to slow down almost immediately after hatching, whether the brain is actually finished or not. All of this sets up a clean scientific bet. If extended parental provisioning really does drive bigger brains, then species that invest more in their young for longer should reliably end up with larger relative brain sizes than close relatives that do not. So when researchers actually ran the numbers across hundreds of real species, did that bet pay off? Yes, and dramatically so. In a study spanning 1,176 different bird species, researchers confirmed that the more time and energy parents invested in feeding their chicks, the larger that species' adult brain size turned out to be. A correlation strong enough to hold up across an entire class of animals. Dig deeper, and the pattern gets more specific. Around 90% of bird species share parenting duties between both parents, but how many caretakers pitch in does not, by itself, actually predict brain size. Mammals flip that arrangement almost completely. More than 80% of mammal species leave all the provisioning to the mother alone. But where a father or another helper pitches in, relative brain size tends to be larger, and a father's own contribution moves the needle more than extra helpers do. The contrast between warm-blooded and cold-blooded animals tells the same story from another angle. Mammal mothers typically keep provisioning until their young reach roughly a third of adult body size at weaning, and many baby birds get fed by their parents until they are nearly full-grown before ever leaving the nest. Cold-blooded animals mostly stop at the egg, but there is one striking exception. Some sharks and rays actually nourish their embryos beyond the egg yolk while still inside the mother, and those particular species have evolved noticeably larger brains than their egg-only relatives, brains that start to approach what you would expect from a warm-blooded animal of similar size. Researchers also measured how steeply brain size scales up with body size across major animal groups, and endotherms consistently come out ahead, running higher in birds and mammals than in fish or amphibians. Even within birds alone, species that get fed after hatching show a steeper brain-to-body scaling relationship than species that have to feed themselves from the moment they crack out of the egg, exactly the pattern the parental provisioning hypothesis predicts. All of that is still correlation, not proof of cause and effect. The researchers behind this synthesis are upfront that they are proposing a hypothesis built on existing comparative data across species, not new experiments, and they say plainly that some of its predictions still need to be tested directly. There is one more thread they are chasing, and it might matter as much as intelligence itself. Bigger brains do not just cost energy, they also cost time, delaying exactly when an animal is finally old enough to reproduce. So the researchers asked a different question. Does that slower development actually pay off in survival, not just in smarts? In a preliminary, not yet published analysis, they looked at 18 primate species across 13 different genera living in undisturbed wild habitats, and found that individuals with relatively larger brains were more likely to survive all the way to their first reproduction, even though it took them longer to get there. If that pattern holds up under more scrutiny, it reframes the whole story. A long, expensive, parent-funded childhood might not just be the price of building a smarter adult. It might be exactly what keeps a vulnerable, half-finished brain alive long enough to finish the job. The study, Extended Parental Provisioning and Variation in Vertebrate Brain Sizes, was led by Carol Van Schaik along with Ziton Song, Caroline Schuppli, Szymon Drobniak, Sandra Heldstab, and Michael Griesser, and was published in the journal PLOS Biology. If you want to dig into the comparative data and the full argument yourself, the paper and our full write-up are linked in the description below.